Zach, thanks for taking time to join us and speak to us at Iowa Ideas today. We appreciate your time. I know it's a busy time of year. Thanks. It's good to catch up with you.
Very good to catch up with another wonderful Zach.
It is. It's confusing. I don't think I've ever been in a webinar yet in Zoom world where I've had two Zachs
It's embarrassing.
at the same time. But I appreciate the spelling of your name too. Um, I thought it would be good, maybe as we talk about creative placemaking, and when you think about it, I always like to start with definitions and kind of how you see the world. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see creative placemaking? What does it mean to you, and how did you know, become so involved and engaged in it?
I got engaged in it completely by accident, which is how I do most things in life. But creative placemaking, to me, it's a very subjective definition. It's very personal in some cases, but as it applies to a place, it's about what makes your community unique. That's pretty much it. And over time, it's kind of applied. People think of it as just arts and culture related, which of course is a very heavy piece of this. It has a lot to do with it, but it goes beyond that. To me, it's in a general definition, what makes your community truly unique. And you can't say things like the people or we're on a river or we have some murals or things like that. It needs to be distinct, something your community has that only your community has. And ideally, your community is known for around the world. But of course, most communities don't have that yet. So it's about identifying what is there that is unique and helping folks around the world understand what you're known for, why you are who you are, why your community exists the way it does. And if you can't pinpoint something, then that's the work that we try to do, is to help you either identify it or create it.
So you mentioned kind of all things happening by accident. I think even your arrival in Iowa more than a decade ago happened somewhat by accident. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, how you ended up here?
Sure. The easy story is I ran out of gas, but that's not true. I was in New York. This is now 15 years ago, and I was doing theater in Brooklyn, and I loved it. But largely, it was a homogenous setting and network, and I didn't feel like I was really challenging myself as an artist or as a person. I was only around people that agreed with my opinion. And I knew that that was not the case in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And so I needed to get out of my bubble. In 2007, I did a road trip to 22 cities around the country. I visited each city for about 3 to 5 days. I was looking for a community that was roughly 500,000 population in the metro, which, compared to New York is rural. I was looking for a community that had a downtown that was revitalizing, but not yet there, a place that struggled to attract and retain its young people, a place that had an art scene that was burgeoning, but not yet established nationally, and a place that was close to 50-50 politically as I could find. And Des Moines checked all my boxes.
And when you got there, I mean, you were one of the founders of the Des Moines Social Club. And can you talk a little bit about, you intentionally got engaged in the community in a pretty unique way with the idea of building and tapping into some resources that were there. Can you talk about, the efforts there and how that's influenced, some of the things that you've done since?
Sure. So, this is definitely stumbling into something for sure. But something I have the habit of doing is basically willing something to come into being. And that's not just me. It takes hundreds of people to do something like that. And the social club for sure was the brainchild of hundreds of people doing so much work to get to that point. But it started with a kernel of I saw the opportunity that a place like Des Moines had. And I didn't know it at the time. We were doing creative placemaking. That term was not really out there then. So we were just doing it kind of by accident. But what we were trying to create is we were looking for all of the very creative people that already lived in Des Moines. And every place has those folks. But a lot of these people felt disenfranchised, didn't have spaces to perform or show their work or demonstrate their writing or their culinary talents, anything arts related. There were a few small venues, but there was nothing that collected them all together. And as I met with people and interviewed people and just sat around late night in bars talking to people, I discovered that there were hundreds of people that felt very similarly and really wanted something to come together. So it was part of it was good timing, which is accidental. So I always like to think of some of the other cities I went to, like I went to Denver. Denver was one of my cities, and I love Denver. But in Denver, 2007, Denver didn't need anything like a social club. They had already gone through that renaissance 10 to 20 years prior. I think one of the biggest reasons I chose Des Moines is that at that moment in 2007, there was already momentum. There were other people that came before me that had jump started that process. And then I was able to plug in with them. And together, we helped create a downtown renaissance in the arts and cultural world, which translated into a term called economic development, which I had never heard of at the time. And that snowballed into everything that we do now.
In those early projects, I think I heard a story where you brought wrestlers and poets together. Can you talk a little bit about how seemingly disconnected things found a common space and a way to work together?
At its core, what we were trying that also was accidental. Um, but we recognized it and then tried to capitalize on it. And so it happened because we had a couple wrestlers that were performing in the theater, and the same time there was a jazz and poetry night in the bar. And there were a couple folks that were doing the wrestling that wanted to participate in the poetry. So we ended up bringing those two worlds together, and it was very successful. And at its core, what we were looking for is it's Republicans and Democrats. It's people that share that opposite ideologies. How do you get them to not agree with each other? That's never the goal. That's up to them. But how do we get them to commingle, to form a relationship, to actually speak to one another and understand that there are different things outside their own bubble, and they again don't have to agree with it, but they need to respect it and recognize that there are other types of people out there and not just hate on the other folks, mostly because they don't know anybody very well at a personal level that feel that way. And that's why, that was never something that was going to happen in Brooklyn. Everybody already felt the same way. But in a place like Des Moines, I was able to come in contact with thousands of people that felt very differently than I did. And their upbringings were completely different than mine. I had to learn to understand all that. And at the core, a good representation of that in the arts world is wrestlers and poets. On paper, those two worlds would not have anything to do with one another, and they didn't. And they came together by accident. And that was the cause of having a physical space to put them together in. That's why that happy accident happened. So that's when we began to get the idea of, okay, we can use this physical space and if we program it in a smart way, where we have things that seemingly would not go together on the same evenings, which meant that we needed multiple venues inside a building so that they would stumble into each other at the bar, at the coffee shop, at the merchandise area, whatever it was, in the lobby. That was the goal, and it worked.
When you think about that and some of the other projects, it seems like there's a flavor, certainly, of finding multiple uses when you're thinking of creative placemaking and some of the projects that you've done working in communities across the state since. How much, did that happy accident stay with you in terms of figuring out the unique aspects of some of the other communities around the state?
It's never left. We still do it now. I mean, we're 3D printing houses in Muscatine right now, and I knew very little about Muscatine before we went there. And there's so much to learn. I have a major appetite for learning about new places and new people and new things, and so it doesn't matter to me where it is. Every community has something interesting, and to me, I find it almost exotic. A new community that I get to go to, and you think back on that. And something that was very telling to me when I first moved to Des Moines, I was in New York. I read the New York Times every day, and I was a frequent writer to the newspaper with letters to the editor, and never once did they publish anything I wrote. And within 2 months of moving to Des Moines, I wrote a letter to the editor, and it got published. And the only difference was it didn't say Brooklyn after my name; it said Des Moines. And to me, that spoke volumes about what makes these worlds exist. And the people of New York think of the people of Iowa as exotic because they don't know. They don't know what's here. They have no idea. And even now it's 2023 and things have become significantly more advanced. Still, I have people, friends and family back in New York that are like, do you have running water? How many cows and pigs do you own? Ridiculous things like that. And that's a symptom of not breaking outside of your shell. They say it in jest, but it's a problem. And that exists on both sides. So when you think about a community, I like to drill down and find out what is truly unique about it. Often the unique thing is a person.
Talk a little bit about, bringing the worlds of the arts and businesses together. In preparation for this, with Iowa Ideas, we've had quite a few conversations with members of the arts community that, see it's sometimes difficult to get business and arts and culture to work together. How have you been able to, bring those worlds to at least see common goal or common purpose and ways to support each other?
That's another big dichotomy, is the art and business world. And on paper, again, they don't go well together. And there's this, age old thing. Oh, you're a starving artist, and you give up. You do that in your 20s, and then once you hit your 30s, you get a real job, and that still persists today. And it's ridiculous, but that is a thought. Another thing that I think we did well at the social club was bringing those two worlds together. We were able to recognize. So many artists will reject the business world. I did, for sure. The entire time I lived in New York, I hated it. I was anti-business, anti-money, really. And there was a certain pride in being broke and being a starving artist. And, I worked 3 jobs in New York like everyone else I knew, because the theater I was doing wasn't paying me. And, you can do that in your 20s. And going through that gauntlet is a rite of passage for many artists. And there's different ways of doing that. But during that process, you kind of learn to reject the other side. And that's unfortunate. Both worlds do that. There was a good example to me of that, which was one of the biggest reasons why I knew I needed to leave New York. This was during the Iraq War. And I was out there. It was a 1 million-person protest march up 6th Avenue in Manhattan. And me and everybody else I knew were part of it. And we're marching, we're holding our signs, and we're screaming "No war" and all the other things you do. And somewhere in one of the blocks, I happened to look up, I don't know, 20, 30 floors up, something like that. And to one of the big buildings, and I saw a man standing at his window, just watching, looking out at us and watching. And a couple seconds later, he just drew his curtains and disappeared. And to me, it was a sign of, wow, he just tuned 1 million people out. This march, while it makes us feel good, how much impact is it actually having? And I think we need to protest. We need to do those things against things that we don't agree with. That's an American right. But we also need to think about how we can be most effective. And it began to get into my head about, all right, I know nothing about that guy. He doesn't know about me either. But why can't I get to know that other side? So in Des Moines, something we recognized right away, and this is a great thing about Des Moines and a great thing about Iowa, is that the business is there. First of all, I would just cold call and cold email CEOs when I first moved there, and surprisingly, they responded, and that would never happen in New York. But in Des Moines, it did, and they would respond, and they would at least respond. Many of them agreed to meet me for coffee. And so I began getting to know them and understanding what their desires and their needs were for their own worlds and their own businesses. And they were saying something very similar, but in an opposite way. They were saying, look, we got a great company, we have great people, but we struggle with retaining them and attracting them because Des Moines and Iowa is not recognized as a cool place or just an interesting place that people want to be in compared to so many other places people could go. And that's the basis of creative placemaking is, okay, how do we help that group solve their issue and how can it benefit the arts and culture world? And so you look at it on paper, it's simply they have a lot of money and the arts and culture world don't, but we can benefit them by helping establish a sense of place. And that's exactly what we did. And we got pushback on that initially. Like, how could you, almost like selling out. How dare you work with these big businesses? And don't you know that it's it's working for the man and ridiculous things like that. And there's undercurrents of that for sure. And then on the other side, the businesses said, you're going to work with these crazy, dirty artists and that are underground and have never done a major performance in their life. What are you thinking? And it worked. Those two worlds recognized that they needed each other, and they still need each other. And that's the history of any major city. That's what they've done. A good scenario is in Austin, Texas. 60, 70 years ago, Austin, Texas was the capital of Texas, and it had the university, and that's really all it was known for. Then along came Willie Nelson, who I think was here in Iowa last night. Um,
Was.
and he didn't. There weren't enough performance venues in Austin for he and his band, so he began to get things started and ended up working with the university to start Austin City Limits as a TV show. That, and I'm giving the fast version, that gave birth to the festival, which gave birth to South by Southwest, which gave birth to a whole influx of people and artists moving to Austin because they could get free healthcare if they lived there, on and on and on. He was the catalyst. In Minneapolis, it was Prince. You can trace this back almost always. It's not always an artist. In Seattle, it was business. It was Microsoft, it was Starbucks, it was Amazon, but it was also the grunge movement of the 90s and all of that coming together. And so when you go to a city, you think about, all right, how do you replicate that? Some of it has to be magic. There's no formula for this, but it's finding the right people and empowering them and making sure they're working with their total opposite, whatever that means, and bringing those worlds together to have a truly just momentous renaissance for a place.
I'm curious, when you walk into some of these places, if this were easy, the solutions would already be happening. And when you're looking for ingredients to figure out, hey, can we make a difference here? Or can we, come up with a project? Are there ingredients? Are there things that you're looking for? Or common, I would imagine engagement and things like that are heavy ingredients into can this go?
Sure. I mean, there are lots of places we go to where on first look there's not much to work with. I mean, we work in towns of 1,000 people or less often, and those are challenging. But in many cases, those actually turn out to be the best projects because you can wrap your arms around it quickly. But excuse me, what we look for is, first you look at the physical place. There has to be a center. Doesn't always have to be a downtown, but often it's a downtown. What does the downtown look like? How, and you think about good examples and bad examples. Here's a bad example in Omaha, where you've got Dodge Street that literally, I don't know if this still does this. I think they do. In the morning, Dodge Street is one way into downtown. In the evening, it's one way out of downtown.
Yep.
And for years, you had people like Jeff Speck and others that are talking about, the walkability and public transportation and things like that are crucial to creative placemaking. And what is your town? How do you see the physical nature of it? So, is the downtown healthy? How many empty storefronts are there? What is happening? What's the buzz in the community? Today, you can do a lot of that research online ahead of time. And it's going through social media. It's looking at review sites. It's going deep into the loudest people on the internet about what they're saying about their community, pro and con. And you have to take it with a grain of salt, of course. Reading city council minute agendas, watching videos of that, but then really a lot of it that's your pre-work, and then it's being on the ground. It's being there and asking questions, and being in the right spot to ask those questions, and typically asking people that don't typically get asked. And you look at people of all ages. Why are you here? Why do you live here? What do you like about it? What do you hate about it? What would you change? If you had $1 million, what would you do? And simple questions like that. They pour out. A big reason why I moved to Des Moines is that's what I was doing on my trip. And I had so many great interactions, mostly with bartenders, of telling me their hopes and dreams of what and really describing in great detail what they felt their community could become. And so that's the genesis. Figuring all that out. And from there, you have to filter it out to specific ideas that are accomplishable. You don't want to just write a plan of, we're going to have a major NFL team in our town of 5,000 people. You need something that could be aspirational, sure, but you need quick hits, quick success. And easy ones are things like painting a mural, rescaping a downtown. But, those are everywhere. But how do you create a business that is going to inspire people and be something truly unique? If you think about the best places in the world, they're known for a thing. They're either known for a person coming from there, an artist, an athlete, a scientist, an entrepreneur, whatever it is. They're known for a product. They're known for a piece of art. They're known for a movement. They're known for architecture. They're known for a food. They're known for a drink. They're known for all of the above. They're known for a sports team. those are, I live in Iowa City. If I rooted against the Hawkeyes, I think no one here would ever talk to me. And so, that's when I tell people I live in Iowa City, that's one of the first two things they say are Iowa Hawkeyes. And then what I love is the next thing they say is the Writers Workshop. It's known. Those are the two biggest things outside of our little bubble here that people know about here. And what a great dichotomy of sports and art.
Absolutely. I'm curious when you think about some of these communities and the what's unique. Some communities getting a mural and getting public art going is a major step forward. How do you get beyond that surface level? We've got one thing into it's a definition of place, or it's about more than that. How do you get from the town on the river to the creative placemaking fully engaged?
20, 30 years ago, doing a mural on the side of a blighted building was a big deal. Today, if you don't have murals, you're behind the times. So still, that's a great thing. You should do it. It's accomplishable. It's a quick success. Absolutely do it. But beyond that, it's about forming a group. There's a community that we've spent a lot of time in, not in Iowa, but in Southern Illinois, called Murfreesboro. And there were three women there that believed they could help transform their downtown into what they wanted it to be for themselves, what they wanted to be for their kids, their family, but they needed a plan. And so we worked with them over 2 years to develop a plan. But largely, all the ideas came from them, not just these three folks, but a group of people. But they were the leaders of this group, and they still are the leaders. And I'm following them online, and I'm seeing the success that they're having. But they had really great catalytic things, such as 17th Street Barbecue is the best barbecue joint in the state of Illinois. One could argue the best in the country. And it was known in the barbecue world, but outside of, people didn't associate it with Murfreesboro. So how do you flip that? How do you and that was a great catalytic thing that we could grab a hold of and really launch. We went through this in Des Moines 10 years ago, changing the food truck laws, which we were instrumental in. And back then, I literally went on an airplane with folks at Des Moines City Council and other leaders to Washington, D.C., and had to bring them to a street and say, look, that's what I'm talking about. They thought that the food trucks had to have their windows open to the street. They can only operate on festivals. I was like, no, you turn them around. They can feed people on the sidewalk. It's around the world. This happens. So, sometimes it's just bringing, people to see new things. But the sense of place has to come from, there have to be leaders and consistent leaders. And they have to know that, unfortunately, their job is never done. They will have a success and they immediately have to move on to the next one and immediately on to the next one, and then find the successors who's going to take over for them after the fact. I don't care what it is they're doing. It could be completely unrelated to arts and culture, but whatever they're doing needs to be unique and help put their place on the map.
How do you talk to communities about the patience to do this? Oftentimes these aren't things that, are maybe 1 year efforts. These are, multi-year, generational, maybe it takes a decade to get that vision in place. How do you coach patience?
It's a great question, and you have to. That's why the quick successes are necessary. If you're only working on a 10-year goal, you're going to get burnt out quick. You need successes to lay back on and say, okay, well, that worked. We're far from done, but that worked. And every time you have a success, more people show up and want to help. If there's anything I know about Americans, regardless of where they live, is that everybody wants to be part of a winning team. And so once you start building that momentum, people show up out of the woodwork and they help. And often the people who come with the ideas and say, I think we should do X, but I'm not going to run it. I can't do it. I don't have time, or whatever it is. Almost 9 times out of 10, those folks end up running it. And it's up to the center leader or leaders of that world to recognize that and empower those folks so that they can't be the only ones doing it. Like in Murfreesboro, those three women, it started out with the three of them, and they didn't really know each other that well. Now, of course, they do, but they recognized they needed to bring in so many other people to be part of that movement to keep the momentum going forward. So you can craft a plan that says, all right, within 6 months, we're going to do X and it's going to be successful. It's a little thing. A mural is often one of those things. But whatever it is, get it done, show that you're successful, because that's going to help turn a lot of the skeptics, of which there will be many. And especially the ones that have lived there all their lives, they've never seen change. They've seen people grow up and leave. So it's helping them understand you have to have successes, and you don't always have to be in charge. You can find other folks, but build a big community to do this.
Is there a project that you look to towards that idea of the skeptics? Or I would imagine you're maybe the salesman in The Simpsons who comes in and sells the town a monorail at times to some of those skeptics. How do you, you know, have you flipped some of them? Is there a project that stands out to
Take,
look to that?
I don't know why this is true, but in everything I've ever done, it seems to take 4 years. It seems to take 4 years till mass adoption and acceptance of the idea. The first 4 years I was in Des Moines, the amount of people that compared me to that character from The Simpsons, or from the Iowa reference called me the Music Man, were too many to count. In fact, I mean, it was crazy, some of the pushback we got. I mean, I was even accused when I got married. People were like, "Oh, you're only marrying an Iowa woman because you want to show that you're actually staying here, but you're not going to stick around." It was crazy,
That's
and
wild.
they're not. You can't fault them necessarily, because so many other people had come and gone before them. But not, I don't think any of those folks were trying to take advantage. I think that they were trying their ideas. It didn't work the way they wanted, and so they moved on. And so that's a failure on both sides. And so there's a stick-to-itiveness that you have to follow through with, and you have to have perseverance. And you should know, and I don't know if this 4-year rule is hard and fast, but for me, that's what it is. Everything I've ever done, it's taken roughly 4 years to become widely accepted. I'm in that right now with the 3D world, introducing that. We're coming up quickly on the 4-year mark, and I can see it. I've been through enough of these to know that that's when it's going to hit.
I'll flip to the 3D in a second here, but I am curious. Coming out of COVID, and have you seen some of the ideas of creative placemaking change? Are there opportunities? In the early days, it was okay, trails and breweries and gathering spaces.
Now
Are there
everybody,
public spaces that are different now?
there have to be. Everybody's got that. And to be fair, every community needs that. So if you don't have that, you got to go and create it. You're starting from scratch. That's okay. You need to have those things to attract. But here's the opportunity that I think that it's a weird thing to say, but if there's anything positive about COVID, it's that it finally woke people up to the idea that you don't have to be attached to a major urban city to experience the best arts and culture, the best educational opportunities, and the best business opportunities. You can do it from anywhere. Now, that requires two basic things. It requires a strong broadband signal, and it requires a home to live in. And in many of the communities we work in, those two things may not exist. So before we get into that, there's this migration pattern happening. This was pre-COVID. You could track people. There was the rise of the third city was going on towards the end of the last decade, and Des Moines is a third city. Boise is a third city. Albuquerque, Madison, Wisconsin, Raleigh, North Carolina, Little Rock, Arkansas, Birmingham, Alabama. These are the cities that were gaining population the same way that a Minneapolis or a Nashville or an Austin did 40 years ago, the same way that San Francisco did 100 years ago. So it was a pattern, and you could track first city, second city, third city, and so on. Today, none of that exists anymore. There's no more rhyme or reason. People are leaving New York and they're going to Clarksdale, Mississippi, and everywhere in between. There's no more rhyme or reason, except they are looking for that sense of place. So here's the opportunity. And this is what we preach whenever we go to any community of any size anywhere, especially the smaller ones. Now is your time to shine. You typically have a lower cost of living. You have a wonderful place that people want to live in, but you need to create a few more of those unique things, or if they already have the unique things, how are you broadcasting that? How are you marketing that? How are you being specific and saying, you know what? We estimate there's about 15 million Americans that are on the move right now, all looking for new places to live, work, and play. How do you get a percentage of them to come to your community? When you're talking to county officials and city officials, you're talking tax dollar base. You're saying, look, you bring in this many people, these families, here's the tax revenue you're going to generate. Here's what it does for your community. They love that. You're talking to businesses. Here are the jobs that you can create and bring this talent in and retain them. When you're talking to artists, here's the world of people that you want to come in so you can build that artistic ecosystem that you so desire. All of them want the same thing. They want to grow. They want people to come in. And now is the moment. In the next 2 to 3 years, all those 15 million Americans, they're going to decide where they're going to go. So how do you make your community shine regardless of the size or location? And sometimes you literally have to pay people to move to your community. And that's something that we're seeing pop up all over America, of these communities saying, we're going to literally incentivize people the same way that we incentivize businesses. It's no different. It's typically a much smaller dollar amount, but having a plan for that. If we want to get 100 new families to move to Johnson County, where I live, okay, who are they? Where are they? How do we reach them? And what do they want? And we can figure all that out in 2 months. And then what's the program to attract them in? We don't always have to pay them, but sometimes that's effective. There's other ways to do it as well. So now's the time to shine. Creative placemaking is at the crux of that entire discussion, that entire argument, the entire movement of how we bring people in. Your place has to be unique. That's what's going to attract them.
I remember when you were at Iowa Ideas 7 or 8 years ago, you were talking about 3D housing, and I'm curious the parallels that you see between and you've worked in creative placemaking from a variety of perspectives, and so 3D housing is kind of the latest evolution of that. What connections do you see between placemaking and housing, and what made you make that jump?
To me, we're finally at the root of the problem of these communities. So for 12 years, we've been working in communities doing creative placemaking and economic development and workforce development and community planning and all the things you can say, helping these towns grow. And we came up with solutions for everything they could throw at us. Our childcare disappeared, our hospital closed, our public schools are underfunded, our broadband sucks, our infrastructure is falling apart. Oh, by the way, a new house hasn't been built here in 20 years. Or the inventory's gone, or it's too expensive, or we have no labor to build, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The one constant problem in every place that we've ever been to, regardless of size or location, is housing. That's the one constant. Every community struggles with it, and not just affordable housing, housing at all levels. Everybody struggles with it. As a nation, we're 5 million homes short from where we need to be. If you take a place like Cook County in Illinois with Chicago, they're 20,000 homes short in Cook County to meet the need. And so this is a systemic issue. And that's another thing that COVID helped shine a light on, is that all these other places struggled with housing, regardless of just your major urban centers. So we couldn't solve it. We couldn't figure out how to solve housing. We were creating revolving loan plans and very intricate things that took forever to funnel money from public and private dollars to help give it to developers to incentivize them to build and all that. And that's fine. That works, but it takes forever. It's expensive and it's not very effective. There's two answers to the housing problem. One is we lower the cost of housing, the materials that it takes to build. And the second is businesses need to pay their employees more to afford the rising cost. Now, since we couldn't control what businesses are doing, we focused on the first point: how do we drop the cost? In 2016, I went to a lecture by this guy, by Thomas Frey, who wrote this crazy book, and he's a futurist. And I didn't know what a futurist was, but hey, that sounded cool. So I got up at 6 a.m, went to this thing, and he was talking about all sorts of things in the future. And one of those things was 3D housing, 3D structures, and I'd never heard of such a thing. And somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, hey, how long until this is the prevalent form of construction in America? And he said, well, and remember, this is 2016. He said, given the cost of land and availability of land in urban areas and zoning and unions and all the red tape that you're going to have to go through and the advancement of the technology, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years. And everybody kind of nodded their heads and we moved on. Afterwards, I went over, I bought his book so he would talk to me. And I said, hey, your point about 3D homes in urban areas taking 10 to 15 years, yeah, that's probably correct. But in rural areas, the smaller communities where you have an abundance of land, it's very affordable to build and the need is high. Don't you think this is a movement and a technology that could take root in rural faster than urban? And he said, I never considered that, but yeah, you might be right. And that's all I needed. And I bugged Thomas Frey to death for like 2 years, picking his brain about all sorts of things. But I went off, I traveled around the world. I met with all the major manufacturers. I had a lot of support back home. And it got to the point where we learned everything we could learn about it. And we were doing a project with HUD at the time. I was in Dallas, Texas, and I met some folks from Virginia Tech University who were equally obsessed with 3D like I was. And we collaborated on a grant that we got from the state of Virginia to print the first home. And that's what gave birth to Allquist and the work that we're doing now.
How did you end up? I mean, obviously, you've got a big summer ahead with projects in Iowa City and Muscatine. And I'm curious about picking those communities. What led you to those places, and what has the advanced, even before you start construction, what have you learned that's maybe challenged some assumptions along the way?
Well, if you do any research on 3D homes, you're going to find people out there selling a whole bunch of monorails. And it's people saying, oh, you can print a home in a day and it costs $10,000. And that's what got me excited back in 2016, 2017. I thought that was true. I bought in. It's not true. You can't print it in a day yet. We will be able to do that, but not now. And it does not cost $10,000, and it probably never will cost $10,000. That's kind of ridiculous. But it does help lower the cost. But we're still early on in this adventure. This is a significant advancement and disruption of one of the biggest industries in the world of construction. But we still build homes the same way we have for the past 100 years with hammers and nails. It is incredibly inefficient, and young people don't want to do it. They don't want to swing a hammer, but they do want to play with a giant robot. So we see this as a workforce development thing. I'll come back to that. But the towns of Muscatine and Iowa City, to your question, in some ways they found us. They had a need, just like everybody. But Muscatine in particular, they have the right vision. And it reminds me a lot of the early days when I first moved to Des Moines. You have public elected officials. The first person that ever called me about this was 2 years ago, was a man named Brad Bark, who at the time was the head of the chamber. Today, he's the mayor of Muscatine. And when we were first getting started with 3D, he contacted us. We've been talking to Muscatine for 2 years to get to this point. But then he brought in the community foundation, he brought in the city council, the county officials, the major business owners. Everybody is on board with the vision of this is not the only way to solve the housing issue, but one way to solve the housing issue is using this new technology. And you want to talk about catalytic sense of place from a creative placemaking standpoint. Doesn't matter how cool your community is if you don't have anywhere to live. Housing is at the base. And so now, actually starting tomorrow, or I guess when people see this, starting 3 days ago on Friday, Muscatine will be able to say forever, they were the first community in the state of Iowa to have a 3D printed home.
How has that process been in terms of, code enforcement and kind of permits and all of that? I mean, have there been a lot of hoops?
No, surprisingly, we thought there would be. Really, everywhere that we've been, all the communities that we've either printed in or we are talking to, the code issue has not been significant. This is an educational gap. I mean, at the base, it's a concrete building. We've been building things out of concrete for hundreds of years all over the world. The only difference here is we don't pour it in a form. We extrude it with a giant robot, which is weird. And we have to explain that to them. But they're interested in the chemical makeup of the material. They want to make sure that this is not going to fall apart, 6 months later or whatever. So we have to prove that. Once we do, they get on board very quickly.
And in terms of Iowa City, that project is a multifamily house, correct? What are kind of the challenges between, so you've got single family on one hand, but then to try multifamily as well?
It's a big leap for us. There's been 5 multi-story buildings printed in the world. One of them is here in America, in Houston, Texas. and that was printed last year. So this is going to be a big learning curve for us, which is when we love that challenge. And again, the officials here in Iowa City and the city leaders, they share that vision. They're like, we want to do it. Let's try it. We know it's possible. Is it going to be at the right price point to start out? Absolutely not. But this is the first step to us getting there. Everybody knows that we will get there. So we're going through right now how to do that. We're the only company in the world that's printed with multiple robots from different companies. We've printed with multiple materials. This is our fifth material that we're using now. It's our third different robot. So there's a lot that are going on with this that we have to pay attention to. And Muscatine and Iowa is it's unique in general. In this project that we start tomorrow is a new robot, a new material, a new climate, and a new team of people that we're training. So there's a lot of unknowns that we're working through.
You had mentioned workforce and a new opportunity for workforce, and I wanted to circle back. You know, how different is this in terms of what workforce needs, or what do you think? How does this change the game in terms of home building?
So, from a workforce standpoint, we think that 3D is a gateway to get young people back into the trades. Historically, if you track the last couple of decades, they're just not doing it. They don't want to be plumbers or electricians or roofers, et cetera. They want to play with computers. And I don't fault them, so do I. And so, how do we shift that? So it's why we're called Alquist, and this kind of brings it all together for me personally. Alquist is a character from a 1920 Czechoslovakian play that no one's ever heard of, unless you do crossword puzzles, called RUR. And this is the first piece of literature that coined the term robot. This is where the word robot comes from. The plot of the show is man invents robots to speed up his manufacturing facility. The robots don't like how they're being treated. They rise up and they kill all the humans. Spoiler alert. It's basically the first sci-fi ever. Every other thing owes its lineage to RUR and to Karl Čapek, the writer. But there's one human named Alquist, who's the main engineer, who's the only person in the show that believes that robots and humans can coexist together peacefully. And so he's spared by the robots and charged with rebuilding the human race in his image. So there he is. You don't have to read the show anymore. But we're called Alquist as a reminder that we are using automation to replace human jobs. There's no way around that. That is happening. That is true. Now we're only replacing the framing of the home. We still need all of our plumbers and carpenters and electricians, et cetera. That's only going to increase, especially in a smaller community like Muscatine that are not building many homes. And typically the labor shortage that these communities see are in people to frame the homes. So we're fixing that problem. Now, we know that we can capitalize on this to help communities grow workforce, which is why we created a curriculum, 8-week certificate course that Muscatine Community College is going to debut this fall. And we're going to be able to create our talent pipeline. And that's what's really exciting about all this. A 3D home, super exciting. I've lived with this for 7 years now. Company's been around for 2.5 years. To me, it's old hat. I still get excited when I go see the printer. As soon as we're done, I'm driving out there to go do that. But the workforce development piece and seeing people get inspired, it's not just young people seeking a change in their careers. Anybody can learn this. There's no prerequisite needed. And so we see this as the major workforce development movement that the state of Iowa should have, that other communities should have. Nobody's taken the ball and run with this yet. So it's going to be very interesting to see over the next couple of years how that plays out.
And I think that's a good final question to ask is how do you see this? What's next? Obviously, you've got this project in Muscatine, you've got Iowa City. How do you see what lessons are you looking to learn there? And how do you see evolution going forward?
Every time we print, we get better, we get faster, we get more efficient. Our team gets more experience. The material gets better. The home itself is better designed. So every time we get better, it's remarkable to see it's very fast changes. This is a technology that keeps getting better, I would say, quarterly. So to me, this is kind of like Silicon Valley in 1972. There's only about 40 so companies globally doing this type of work. We all know each other. We all sort of play nicely in the sandbox. One thing we're trying to do is help lead that movement and bring this world together and collaborate because there is no competition. There's about 6 or 7 companies in America doing this work besides us. They're not fighting over land and muscatine with us. So we should be collaborating, and most of the groups get that. So what I see is a way to solve the infrastructure and housing problem that plagues every single community, regardless of size and location, and at the same time can lead a catalytic movement for creative placemaking that can set a place apart and inspire lots of other people to want to be in that community. And what I get excited about are what are the ideas those folks are going to have? What's going to come next?
True last question. How has the adoption been to, I mean, you're challenging the status quo and some of the current trades. Has it been a smooth reception, or has it been, challenging to kind of bring this vision in to the current state too?
Just like the code issue, it has not been a challenge. There's naysayers for sure, everywhere, always. But for the most part, people get on board. I mean, we're talking to unions in Chicago, which you'd think would be the most challenging to break through. It's not. They recognize that this is the future of construction, and they're smart and they want to get ahead of it. So what they want is training. They want to learn how to do this. And it's a wonderful evolution. It's not like the certain lobbies or trade groups are that stand in the way of blocking us. Now it's early. There's only about 12 3D homes in America right now, so it's not like we're taking any business away from them. 5 years from now, who knows? That could become a challenge. But so far, so good. Nobody's really standing in the way.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Zack, I appreciate you taking the time with us. It's fascinating stuff, and I think we'll be excited to see as the summer progresses how those homes progress and what you learn. So we'll be checking in again. But I appreciate you taking the time with us today.
You bet. Thank you, Zach, and I hope folks enjoy.